David Greenspoon once said, "The story of our species is one of overcoming existential risks through new forms of cooperation and innovation." Keep this in mind as I discuss today the upcoming meeting of Russia and China and how that's going to shape the world in more ways than you can imagine. My name is Dr. David Waralu, and you are watching Geopolitics in Conflict.
Vladimir Putin and China's Xi Jinping come face-to-face for a high-stakes summit.
Vladimir Putin wants whatever he can get from China to help his war effort in Ukraine.
Well, Vladimir Putin is meeting with two of Russia's most powerful allies as his war in Ukraine suffers serious setbacks on the battlefield.
The Chinese president met with his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, pledging mutual support and cooperation on core interests.
What can the US do when this is happening?
I think the US should just kind of sit back and watch the show.
Do you want to know how to differentiate between the truth and lies? Check out our free PDF, 3 ways to know if you are hearing the truth or lies. You can check it out at geopoliticsinconflict.com/truth or lies and start being in control of your own truth. Here is a provocative statement for you, just to start the conversation. What China and Russia intend to discuss soon will reshape our global order in more ways than you can imagine. Putin's Russia and Xi's China will meet next week during a meeting at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or SCO, in the Uzbek city of Samarkand. But before we launch into this, let me at least provide you a brief history of the SCO. The SCO, or the Shanghai Five Group. The Shanghai Five Group was created in 1996 with the signing of the Treaty on Deepening Military Trust in Border Region in Shanghai. And it was signed by the head of states of China, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, and Tajikistan. On June 15, 2001, the leaders of these nations and Uzbekistan met in Shanghai to announce a new organization with a much deeper political and economic cooperation. It's known as the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And the charter was signed on July 7, 2002, which entered into force on September 19, 2003. Its membership has since expanded to 8 states, with India and Pakistan joining in 2017. The SCO is often mocked in the Western media as the club of dictators. But with India joining this regional security forum, such jokes have become now boring. In terms of geographic scope and population, let me tell you, SCO is the world's largest regional organization, covering approximately 60% of the area of Eurasia, 40% of the world population, and more than 30% of global GDP. Unlike the BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, which is a rock star in the global media, the SCO has mostly operated away from the limelight. But the SCO has a wider footprint that stretches from Europe to the Pacific Ocean. And with India's inclusion into the group now, it covers nearly half of the world population. So let just that sink in for a moment. So here's the thing. The Chinese President Xi meeting with Vladimir Putin during a visit to the neighboring Central Asian nations of Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, which is going to happen next week. Most likely it will be, they were already met by the time you see in this video. So, in what will be his first overseas, meaning President Xi's visit since the start of the pandemic outbreak in late 2019. President Xi has only left the mainland, by the way, just FYI. He left the mainland China to only make one-day visit to Hong Kong in July to speak at the ceremony commemorating the 25th anniversary of its handover from Britain to China's rule. I believe the meeting is of great significance, both from an economic and geopolitical perspective. So here's the question that we need to ask. What could possibly President Putin and President Xi talk about in this upcoming meeting? Well, the list is long, but I am here to provide you insights into what the bilateral talks will mostly likely to focus on, given where the trends are headed. So despite what Beijing insists on saying that it has no plan to help sustain Russia's military intervention in Ukraine, I see otherwise. As argued in my Russia book, the strategically significant Sino-Russian relationship is far too important for China. So let's focus first on the financial sector, shall we? Because that's what's going to be at the heart of the conversation between the two leaders. I believe the bilateral talks will focus on moving forward with the establishment of the financial system to bypass the US dollar. How so, you may ask? Well, look no further at how much gold Russia has been accumulating in the last 20 years. The IMF also reported that China official holding is only 1,000 tons of gold. But there is widespread belief that it has been accumulating additional gold over the past several years, perhaps to the tune of about 5,000 tons, while holding this in a separate non-reportable account. And we will provide you a link to all this. Could this mean that both Putin and Xi wants to expedite the financial infrastructure to bypass the US dollar? The answer is obvious, but it will take time. Make no mistake, the world financial market is changing, and the Ukraine conflict made it clear to many countries around the world that time is in the essence to reconsider other alternatives to the US dollar. The next logical question is, will the US dollar lose its status? But first, let me just share with you what are the reserve currencies on the world as of today. So reserve currencies are typically issued by large developed countries with a record of financial stability to be held in a reserve by foreign central bank. A currency typically reflects the need to do few things. First, to be freely convertible, not pegged to the government. Two, have a large and liquid debt market that foreign investors can access. Three, have an independent central bank. And four, be widely used in trade and global transaction. In addition to the US dollar, there's the euro, the Japanese yen, British pound, Swiss francs, Australian dollar, and Chinese renminbi are all held in a reserve. However, the dollar is by far the most widely held currency at a 60% based on 2020 data from the IMF, and we will provide you a link to this. It is, however, pivotal to highlight how the US dollar came to dominate the global financial market. To understand this, you must go back into the history and understand how it all evolved. Let me share with you a brief period of history that ended up shaping the world financial market today. It was not random, by the way, it was by design. And most people do not know or understand why and how. Few weeks after the invasion of the D-Day in July 1944, when it became evident and clear that the Nazis would fall and the victory of the West was but assured, 730 people from 44 allied nations flew to the US for a meeting at Bretton Woods resort in New Hampshire. And by the way, it is a great ski resort if you ever end up going there. The objective of the meeting wasn't about exchanging gifts for Christmas or celebrating victory over the Nazis. It was about setting up an agenda, financial one to be specific, that will and still define the world today. Mind you, the gathering of these leaders was specifically about the future of the money, while the war wouldn't even end up for another year. They were already discussing ways to prevent another World War III from happening. Interestingly, during this conference, the decision was made to create the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, which is basically the world new bank. What many do not know is that the discussions in the meeting centered on the topic of gold. The attendees or leaders, whatever you want to call them, vowed to never deal with a war again over money. Interestingly, after World War I, Allied powers imposed damages on Germany at that time. So much that the Germans couldn't even pay the debt. As a result, hyperinflation drove Germany's economy to the ground. With massive economic downturn, Germany, hyperinflation, by the way, was up to 41%. This setting paved the way for the rise of Third Reich, leading to invasion of Poland and World War II. During the Bretton Woods discussions, the consensus was that no currency will be removed from the gold standard, and that the removal of a currency from the gold standard would lead to economic devastation. The argument back then, which was not well explained or understood by many here in the United States and many in other parts of the world, is that these 44 Allied powers or nations knew that taking a country's currency off precious metals, for example, as a standard would be disastrous. And the argument made back then is that if a country is collapsing, survival mode will kick in, like us humans. When there is a massive starvation, for example, people must do whatever it takes to survive. Countries are no different. The argument continues that in a desperate need to survive, a country might end up invading others to steal the resources. The US, unfortunately, disregarded this advice. As a result, in 1970, Richard Nixon took the US off the gold standard. And he said, and I quote, "We must protect the possession of the American dollar as a pillar of monetary stability around the world. I have directed the Secretary of Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connelly to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets." End of quote. Fascinating, isn't it? That in one speech, Nixon ended everything that the Allied powers agreed upon at Bretton Woods. And what most Americans do not know or grasp is that the dollar isn't based on anything. It's based on debt, $31 trillion. Could this explain, for example, why the invasion of Iraq, when Saddam Hussein wanted to trade oil in euros? Or Libya, when Gaddafi planned to quit selling Libyan oil in the US, demanding payments instead in gold-backed dinar as a single African currency? And that's exactly what happened. Up until the date of the Bretton Woods agreement was left in the early 1970s. Oil was traded internationally for gold bullion. At the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, the US convinced the Europeans and then the Japanese, and later on OPEC, the oil producing exporting countries, to all accept the US dollar as the world reserve currency in place of gold bullion, with the promise that the US would maintain its dollar as a stable currency. The agreement was the US dollar will serve as the international benchmark against which all currencies and commodities would be traded. This was done with the understanding that the US dollar would be fully convertible to gold bullion at $35 per troy ounce. OPEC originally accepted the US dollar, but demanded they be immediately exchanged for gold, as the US has promised to do in 1944. Could this explain why the US is so nervous now about the Saudis accepting payment in the Chinese yuan? Could the Chinese or could the petro yuan replace the petrodollar? Possibly. The bottom line is this: the talks between Russia and China in the next few days will focus on the monetary aspect for both countries to move to the next phase of their financial cooperation. And FYI, Russia Gazprom, by the way, just said yesterday it has signed an agreement to start switching payments for gas supplies to China to yuan and rubles instead of the dollar. China pays for Russian energy, and we're going to provide you a link for that. President Xi and President Putin spoke in mid-June, confirming their practical cooperation has developed steadily as they have maintained a good momentum of development. China also confirmed that it is willing, together with Russia, to continue to support each other on issues concerning core interests and major concerns such as sovereignty, security, and of course intensify strategic coordination between the two countries, let alone strengthen communication and coordination in a major international and regional organization. So here's my conclusion to you. With certainty, however, one can conclude that the Russia-China alliance will further contribute to precipitous shift in the global order and further decline of the US share of global power. Alas, the shift in the global balance of power is already underway. Here is my question for you for today. Are China and Russia moving into a strategic alliance? If so, how will it impact you and shape the future of global order? Make sure to leave me some comments in the comment section and I will respond to your comments. As always, prepare yourself for a changing world order. Till next time. Bye-bye.